Secrets in the Golden City. In the vibrant city of Jaipur, where the golden hues of the ancient palaces blend seamlessly with the bustling streets, Aryan and Neha lived a life that seemed picture-perfect. Aryan was a distinguished doctor, celebrated for his expertise in cardiology, while Neha, his devoted wife, managed their home with an elegance that reflected her deep affection for their shared life. Their home, a tastefully decorated residence in the heart of the city, was a sanctuary of peace amidst the chaos of Jaipur. Aryan's work was demanding, but he found solace in the comforting routine that awaited him each evening. Neha's presence was a constant source of support, and their bond, though marked by routine, was strong and loving. One fateful day, Aryan was invited to participate in a public health interview organized by a local news agency. The interview aimed to address the community's concerns about heart health and preventive care. Aryan, always eager to contribute to public awareness, agreed to take part. The day of the interview arrived with the promise of a lively discussion. Aryan found himself in a brightly lit studio, surrounded by cameras and crew members preparing for the broadcast. Amid the flurry of activity, his attention was drawn to Priya, a young and passionate journalist who was to conduct the interview. Priya's enthusiasm was palpable, her eyes sparkled with an intensity that was both refreshing and disarming. As Priya introduced herself and began discussing the topics for the interview, Aryan was struck by her energy and her genuine interest in the subject matter. Her questions were thoughtful and probing, pushing Aryan to reflect deeply on his work and its impact on the community. The interview was engaging, and Aryan found himself captivated by Priya's insightful inquiries and her commitment to her role. After the interview, Priya and Aryan exchanged pleasantries. Her approach had left a lasting impression on him. Over the following weeks, they continued to communicate as Priya wrote articles based on the interview. Their conversations grew more frequent, transitioning from professional to personal. Aryan found himself drawn to Priya's enthusiasm for life and her passion for journalism, which contrasted sharply with his own routine-driven existence. As their conversations deepened, Aryan began to feel a subtle shift within himself. The connection he felt with Priya was different, an invigorating breath of fresh air in his otherwise predictable life. They discussed everything from professional challenges to personal dreams, and Aryan found himself sharing thoughts and feelings he hadn't articulated in years. Priya's presence in Aryan's life was like a spark that reignited his sense of adventure and curiosity. The conversations they shared, the laughter that came effortlessly, and the genuine interest Priya showed in his experiences began to erode the complacency that had settled in his marriage with Neha. Though Aryan was still committed to his wife, he couldn't ignore the growing fascination he felt towards Priya. As Aryan juggled his busy schedule and his newfound friendship with Priya, he started to notice subtle changes in himself. He was more animated, more engaged, and he began to question the monotony that had crept into his relationship with Neha. Priya's influence was slowly reshaping his perspective, and Aryan found himself at a crossroads, caught between the comfortable familiarity of his life with Neha and the exciting, albeit uncertain, path that his interactions with Priya seemed to promise. Little did Aryan know that this newfound connection would set off a chain of events that would challenge the foundations of his marriage and test his own moral compass. The journey had just begun, and the secrets that lay ahead in the golden city of Jaipur would soon unravel in ways he could never have anticipated. Secrets in the Golden City. The deepening connection. As the weeks passed, Aryan and Priya's connection grew more profound. What had begun as a professional interaction had blossomed into something much more personal and intimate. Priya's articles on public health were insightful, but their discussions extended far beyond the topics of heart disease and wellness. They delved into their personal lives, aspirations, and vulnerabilities, building a bond that was both stimulating and comforting. Priya's vivacious nature and deep empathy created a safe space for Aryan. He found himself sharing more than he had ever revealed to anyone before. Their conversations, initially casual, had begun to carry a weight of emotional significance. Priya's ability to listen and understand Aryan's concerns about his work and life made him feel valued and heard in ways he hadn't experienced in a long time. One evening, Priya invited Aryan to a cultural event she was covering for her news outlet. The event, a traditional Rajasthani festival with vibrant colors and lively music, was a celebration of the region's rich heritage. Aryan, intrigued by Priya's enthusiasm, agreed to attend. The festival was a sensory overload of sights, sounds, and smells, and Aryan found himself immersed in the joy of the celebration. As they wandered through the festival, Priya's hand brushed against Aryan's. It was a fleeting touch, but it sent a ripple through Ari. As the weeks progressed, the relationship between Aryan and Priya deepened in unexpected ways. What had started as a professional connection during the public health interview slowly evolved into something far more personal. Priya's passion for journalism and her infectious enthusiasm had drawn Aryan in, creating a magnetic pull that neither of them could easily ignore. Their conversations, initially centered around Aryan's expertise in cardiology and public health, began to touch upon more personal matters. They talked about their dreams, their fears, and their life experiences. Priya's ability to listen without judgment and her insightful reflections provided Aryan with a sense of emotional intimacy that he hadn't felt in years. She seemed to understand him in ways that even Neha, despite her love and support, couldn't. One evening, Priya invited Aryan to a cultural event she was covering for her news outlet. It was a traditional Rajasthani festival celebrated with great fervor, showcasing the region's rich heritage through vibrant dances, music, and colorful displays. Aryan, intrigued by the prospect of experiencing this part of Jaipur's culture, eagerly accepted the invitation. The festival was a dazzling spectacle, with strings of lights illuminating the streets and the aroma of exotic spices wafting through the air. Priya was in her element, capturing the essence of the celebration with her camera and interacting with the locals. Aryan watched her with admiration, captivated by her energy and the ease with which she moved through the crowd. As they wandered through the bustling festival, Aryan and Priya found themselves drawn closer together. They shared laughter and moments of quiet reflection amidst the vibrant chaos. At one point, Priya pulled Aryan aside to show him a particularly stunning display of handcrafted jewelry. As they stood close, Priya's hand brushed against Aryan's, and for a moment, their fingers lingered. It was a seemingly innocent touch, but it sent a shiver down Aryan's spine. He could feel the electric charge in the air, the undeniable chemistry between them. They exchanged a glance that spoke volumes, a silent acknowledgement of the growing connection that neither of them could ignore. The evening was a turning point. Aryan found himself increasingly drawn to Priya's presence. She was more than just a journalist, she was a breath of fresh air in his life, a source of excitement and intrigue. Her insights and her way of making him feel truly seen were intoxicating. As the festival wound down and the crowd began to disperse, Aryan realized how much he had come to value Priya's companionship. Back in the quieter moments of their interactions, Priya continued to provide Aryan with emotional support. She became a confidant and a source of strength as he navigated challenges in his career and personal life. Aryan began to feel a growing sense of dissatisfaction with his marriage, not because of any overt problems with Neha, but because the excitement and passion he found with Priya were starkly different from the comfortable predictability of his life with his wife. Priya's influence started to seep into every aspect of Aryan's life. He began to question his own sense of fulfillment, and the monotony that had begun to creep into his relationship with Neha. The thrill of his interactions with Priya made the routine of his daily life seem drab by comparison. He found himself yearning for the kind of connection he experienced with Priya, which only intensified his internal struggle. As Aryan grappled with these conflicting emotions, he was also aware of the implications of his growing feelings for Priya. He knew that his actions could have serious consequences for his marriage and his personal integrity. Despite his awareness, the allure of Priya's company and the emotional depth they shared continued to draw him further away from the life he had built with Neha. The festival had marked a significant shift in Aryan's perspective. The excitement and the undeniable chemistry he felt with Priya had planted the seeds of doubt in his mind about his current relationship. As he continued to explore this new emotional territory with Priya, he was unknowingly edging closer to a crossroads that would force him to confront the reality of his feelings and the impact they would have on everyone involved. As Aryan's connection with Priya deepened, his relationship with Neha began to show signs of strain. The once comfortable routine that had characterized their marriage started to feel more like a burden. Aryan found himself growing increasingly distant, retreating into his thoughts whenever he was at home. He spent more time at the hospital, often using work as an excuse to avoid facing the discomfort that was slowly creeping into his domestic life. Neha, ever perceptive, noticed the subtle changes in Aryan. She could sense that something was amiss but couldn't quite put her finger on it. Their conversations, once full of warmth and shared experiences, had become stilted and brief. Aryan seemed preoccupied, and although he assured her that everything was fine, Neha couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he wasn't telling her. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, Neha tried to bridge the growing distance between them. She brought up the idea of taking a short vacation together, hoping that some time away from the city would help them reconnect. Aryan, however, was hesitant. He mumbled something about his busy schedule at the hospital and how he couldn't afford to take time off just yet. Neha's disappointment was palpable, but she pushed it aside, telling herself that Aryan was simply stressed from work. Despite Neha's efforts to reignite the spark in their marriage, Aryan found himself increasingly drawn to Priya. Their meetings became more frequent, often under the guise of professional collaboration. They would meet for coffee after work or go for walks in the city, discussing everything from their professional ambitions to their views on life and love. With Priya, Aryan felt alive in a way he hadn't in years. The excitement and the emotional intensity of their conversations were intoxicating. One day, after a particularly long and challenging day at the hospital, Aryan found himself standing outside Priya's office. He hadn't planned to visit her, but something had drawn him there. He texted her, asking if she was free to grab a coffee. Priya responded almost immediately, inviting him to join her at a nearby cafe. As they sat across from each other, the conversation flowed effortlessly, as it always did. Priya listened intently as Aryan spoke about the challenges he faced at work. She offered her perspective, often challenging him to think differently or consider alternative solutions. Her insights were sharp, and her encouragement gave Aryan a sense of clarity that he hadn't felt in a long time. It was during these moments that Aryan began to question the path his life had taken. Was he truly happy with where he was? Or had he simply fallen into a pattern that no longer fulfilled him? As they finished their coffee, Priya suggested they take a walk. The evening was cool, and the streets of Jaipur were bustling with life. They strolled through the narrow lanes of the old city, passing by markets filled with the scent of spices and the vibrant colors of traditional Rajasthani fabrics. Aryan felt a sense of peace as they walked side by side, lost in conversation. It was as if the rest of the world had faded away, leaving only the two of them in their little bubble. At one point, they stopped in front of a small temple tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. Priya turned to Aryan and asked him a question that caught him off guard. "Are you happy, Aryan?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Aryan hesitated, unsure of how to respond. He knew the answer, but saying it out loud felt like a betrayal. Priya watched him closely, her eyes filled with concern and something else, something deeper that Aryan couldn't quite decipher. After a long pause, Aryan finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," he admitted. Priya didn't press him further. Instead, she reached out and gently squeezed his hand, offering silent support. They stood there for a few moments, the weight of Aryan's confession settling between them. It was a moment of raw honesty, one that marked a turning point in their relationship. Aryan knew that there was no going back from this. His life, as he knew it, was beginning to unravel. As they parted ways that evening, Aryan couldn't stop thinking about Priya's question. It echoed in his mind, forcing him to confront the reality of his feelings. He was no longer satisfied with the life he was living, and his connection with Priya had only made that realization more apparent. The emotional distance between him and Neha had grown into a chasm, and Aryan found himself standing on the edge, unsure of what to do next. Back at home, Neha waited for Aryan to return, unaware of the storm brewing within him. She had noticed his prolonged absence, but when he finally walked through the door, she could sense that something had changed. Aryan's mind was miles away, lost in thoughts of Priya and the future that now seemed uncertain. The tension in their home grew thicker with each passing day. Neha tried to reach out, but Aryan's responses were distant and noncommittal. The warmth that had once defined their relationship was fading, replaced by a coldness that neither of them knew how to overcome. Neha's suspicions began to grow, and though she tried to push them aside, the unease gnawed at her. As Aryan continued to grapple with his feelings, he found himself at a crossroads. The choices he made in the coming days would have far-reaching consequences, not just for him but for everyone involved. The secrets he was keeping, the emotions he was battling, and the connection he shared with Priya were all coming to a head, leading to a moment of reckoning that was now inevitable. Aryan's internal turmoil reached new heights as the days passed. The emotional conflict within him was impossible to ignore, yet he continued to hide his growing feelings for Priya from Neha. At home, the atmosphere was tense. Neha's attempts to connect with Aryan were met with half-hearted responses, and the once warm and loving environment they had shared began to feel cold and distant. Neha, who had always prided herself on the closeness of their marriage, could no longer deny that something was wrong. She had noticed the late nights, the frequent absences, and the shift in Aryan's demeanor. He seemed distracted, preoccupied with thoughts that he refused to share. The warmth in his eyes when he looked at her was gone, replaced by a distant, almost mechanical kindness that made her feel as though she was living with a stranger. One evening, after yet another silent dinner, Neha decided she could no longer sit by and watch her marriage crumble. She confronted Aryan, asking him directly if there was something going on, if there was someone else. Aryan, taken aback by the directness of her question, hesitated. The silence between them was thick, and Neha's heart pounded as she waited for his answer. "No, there's no one else," Aryan finally said, his voice unsteady. It was a lie, one that weighed heavily on him the moment he uttered it. But he wasn't ready to face the truth, not yet. He couldn't bring himself to hurt Neha, not after everything they had been through together. He rationalized that he was still figuring out his feelings, that he needed more time to understand what he wanted. Neha wanted to believe him, but the doubt in her mind was persistent. She could feel that Aryan was hiding something, but without any concrete evidence, she didn't know how to proceed. She decided to trust him, hoping that whatever was causing the rift between them would eventually pass. But the situation only grew more complicated. Aryan's meetings with Priya became more frequent, their bond deepening with each interaction. Priya was aware of the tension in Aryan's life and the strain it was putting on his marriage. She didn't press him for details, but she was there for him, offering support and a listening ear whenever he needed it. Their conversations became more intimate, filled with shared confessions and unspoken emotions. One afternoon, as they sat together in a quiet cafe, Priya noticed the fatigue etched on Aryan's face. He seemed exhausted, both physically and emotionally, as if the weight of his double life was finally taking its toll. Priya reached out and touched his hand, offering comfort without words. Aryan looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and something else, something deeper that had been growing between them for weeks. "I don't know how much longer I can do this," Aryan confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I feel like I'm being torn apart. I don't want to hurt Neha, but I can't stop thinking about you." Priya's heart ached at his words. She had tried to keep her distance, to maintain a professional relationship, but she couldn't deny that she had developed strong feelings for Aryan. She cared about him deeply, more than she had ever intended. But she also knew that what they were doing was dangerous, that it had the potential to destroy lives. "Aryan," Priya began cautiously, "I care about you too. But you need to figure out what you want, really want. This isn't fair to Neha, and it's not fair to you either. You can't keep living like this, caught between two worlds." Aryan knew she was right, but the thought of making a decision terrified him. The idea of losing Neha, the woman who had stood by him for so many years, was unbearable. Yet, the thought of losing Priya, of never seeing her again, felt equally devastating. He was trapped in a web of his own making, with no clear way out. As they parted ways that day, Aryan's mind was in turmoil. He knew he couldn't continue like this, but every time he thought about making a choice, his heart recoiled in fear. He began avoiding the topic with Priya, throwing himself into his work instead, hoping that the distractions would help him gain some clarity. But clarity remained elusive. Aryan's guilt gnawed at him, especially when he was with Neha. He found himself becoming more irritable, snapping at her over small things, and then immediately regretting it. Neha, for her part, tried to be patient, but the emotional distance between them was growing, and she couldn't help but feel hurt by Aryan's behavior. One night, unable to sleep, Neha found herself scrolling through Aryan's phone. She had never done this before, trusting him implicitly, but the nagging doubt in her mind drove her to it. As she went through his messages, she noticed a thread of emails and texts between Aryan and Priya. The tone of the messages was friendly, but there was something in the way they communicated that made Neha's heart sink. One message, in particular, caught her attention. It was from Priya, sent late at night, thanking Aryan for being there for her and for the wonderful evening they had spent together. Neha's hands trembled as she read the words, the meaning behind them clear. Her worst fears were confirmed. Aryan was emotionally involved with someone else. Devastated, Neha sat in the darkness, trying to process the betrayal. The man she loved, the man she had built her life with, was slipping away from her, and she didn't know how to stop it. She felt a wave of anger, followed by overwhelming sadness. Her mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Was it just emotional, or had it gone further? And most importantly, why had Aryan chosen someone else over her? Neha knew she had to confront Aryan, but the thought of doing so filled her with dread. She feared the truth, feared that it would shatter whatever remained of their marriage. But she also knew that she couldn't continue living in the dark, pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. The confrontation was inevitable, and as Neha braced herself for the difficult conversation, she couldn't help but wonder if their marriage could survive this betrayal. Aryan's secret was out, and the fallout would test the very foundation of their relationship. The next morning, the tension in the air was palpable. Aryan could sense something was wrong the moment he woke up. Neha was unusually quiet, her movements around the house stiff and mechanical. She avoided eye contact, and when she did speak, her voice was distant, almost cold. Aryan felt a knot forming in his stomach. He knew this day would come, but he had hoped for more time to figure out what he truly wanted, more time to spare Neha the pain of his betrayal. Neha, on the other hand, was barely holding herself together. The discovery of Aryan's emotional affair with Priya had left her devastated, but she was determined to get through the day. She wanted to confront Aryan when she was calm and collected, not in the throes of anger and hurt. But as the day dragged on, her resolve began to waver. The weight of the secret she now carried was too much to bear. By evening, Neha couldn't take it any longer. She found Aryan in his study, buried in paperwork. For a moment, she just stood there, watching him. This was the man she had loved for so many years, the man she had shared her life with. How had they gotten here? How had their love turned into this tangled mess of secrets and lies? Aryan, she said, her voice steady but laced with sadness. He looked up, surprised to see her standing there. Neha, what's wrong? She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. I know about Priya. The color drained from Aryan's face. He felt as though the floor had just dropped out from beneath him. What do you mean? Neha's eyes filled with tears, but she forced herself to stay strong. I know about the emails, the texts, the late nights you've been spending with her. I know everything. Aryan's heart pounded in his chest. The truth was out, and there was no denying it now. He had been caught, and the look in Neha's eyes told him that he had deeply wounded her.
Neha, I can explain.
Can you? Neha's voice cracked. Can you explain how you could do this to me? To us? I thought we were happy, Aryan. I thought we had something special. Aryan rose from his chair and walked toward her, but Neha stepped back, keeping her distance. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he began, his voice filled with regret. Priya and we just connected. It started as work and then it turned into something else. But I swear, I never meant to hurt you. Neha's tears finally spilled over. You didn't mean to hurt me? Aryan, you've shattered me. You've broken everything we've built together. Aryan's heart ached at the sight of her pain. Neha, I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. I was confused, I was struggling, and Priya was there for me. But it's you that I love. It's always been you. Neha shook her head, her tears blurring her vision. How can I believe that? How can I trust you again after this? You didn't just betray me, Aryan, you betrayed our marriage, our future. Aryan felt a lump in his throat. He had never wanted this, never wanted to hurt Neha or destroy their life together. But now, seeing the devastation in her eyes, he realized just how deeply he had wounded her. Neha, please, I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I'll end things with Priya. I'll go to counseling, whatever you want. Just don't give up on us. Neha wanted to believe him, wanted to hold on to the hope that they could salvage their marriage. But the betrayal was too fresh, too painful. I don't know, Aryan, she whispered. I don't know if I can ever forgive you. The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Aryan reached out to her, but she turned away, unable to bear the sight of him. I need time, Neha said, her voice barely audible. I need time to think, to figure out if I can ever trust you again. Aryan's heart sank, but he knew she was right. He had broken their bond, and it would take more than words to repair the damage he had done. Take all the time you need, he said quietly. I'll be here, waiting, hoping that we can find a way back to each other. Neha nodded, her heart heavy with sorrow. She turned and walked out of the study, leaving Aryan standing alone, consumed by regret and fear. As she closed the door behind her, Neha felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of loss. She didn't know what the future held for them, or if their marriage could survive this betrayal. But one thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same again. That night, as Neha lay in bed, sleep eluded her. Her mind replayed the moments of their confrontation over and over, each time deepening the wound in her heart. Aryan, in the other room, felt the same. The house that had once been filled with love and laughter now felt like a prison, each wall echoing with the pain of what had been lost. Both Aryan and Neha were left to grapple with the consequences of their choices, unsure of what the next day would bring, but knowing that their lives had been forever altered by the secrets that had come to light. The days that followed were marked by a heavy silence between Aryan and Neha. They went about their routines like strangers living under the same roof, both lost in their own thoughts and turmoil. Aryan threw himself into his work, staying late at the hospital to avoid coming home. The guilt gnawed at him, but he didn't know how to begin repairing the damage he had caused. Neha, meanwhile, was consumed by her own pain and confusion. She replayed every moment of their marriage in her mind, trying to understand where things had gone wrong. One evening, after a particularly long and grueling day at the hospital, Aryan came home to find Neha sitting in the living room, her expression unreadable. She had been waiting for him, and Aryan knew that they couldn't continue avoiding the conversation that had been looming over them. "Aryan, we need to talk," Neha said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. He nodded, feeling the weight of her words. They sat down together, the space between them a chasm that neither knew how to bridge. "I've been thinking a lot," Neha began, her gaze fixed on the floor. "About us, about what happened. I've been trying to figure out if there's a way forward." Aryan's heart raced. He had been dreading this moment, fearing that Neha would decide their marriage was beyond saving. "And?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Neha looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "I don't know if I can ever forget what you did, Aryan. The betrayal, the lies, it's not something I can easily move past. But I also know that I don't want to throw away everything we've built together. I don't want to lose you." Aryan felt a glimmer of hope, but it was tempered by the reality of their situation. "I don't want to lose you either, Neha. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. I know I've hurt you deeply, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you'll let me." Neha took a deep breath, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "I need to know why, Aryan. Why did you turn to Priya? Was it something I did or didn't do? Was I not enough for you?" Aryan shook his head vehemently, his heart aching at the pain in Neha's voice. "No, Neha, it wasn't anything you did. You've always been enough for me. I was going through a tough time at work, feeling like I was losing my passion for medicine. Priya was there, and she understood what I was going through. We connected on a level that I didn't even realize I was missing. But it was never about you being inadequate. It was about me losing sight of what truly matters." Neha listened, her heart heavy with a mix of emotions. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that they could rebuild their relationship. But the trust had been shattered, and she didn't know if it could ever be fully restored. "I don't know if I can trust you again," Neha said, her voice breaking. "Every time you're late, every time you pick up your phone, I'll wonder if you're talking to her. I'll wonder if there's someone else." Aryan reached out, taking Neha's hand in his. "I understand, and I know it will take time. But I'm committed to earning back your trust. I've already ended things with Priya. I told her that I need to focus on my marriage, on us. I'll do whatever it takes to prove to you that I'm serious about this." Neha squeezed his hand, feeling a flicker of the connection they once shared. "I want to believe you, Aryan. I want to believe that we can get through this. But it's going to take time, and it's going to be hard." Aryan nodded, his eyes filled with determination. "I know, and I'm ready to put in the work. We can go to counseling, whatever it takes. I just want to rebuild what we've lost, Neha." For the first time in days, Neha allowed herself to hope. She could see the sincerity in Aryan's eyes, the regret and the desire to make things right. But she also knew that it wouldn't be easy. They had a long road ahead of them, filled with difficult conversations and the need to rebuild trust from the ground up. As they sat there, holding hands in the dim light of their living room. They both knew that the future was uncertain. But for the first time since Neha had discovered Aryan's betrayal, there was a sense of possibility, of a future where they could find their way back to each other, stronger and more connected than before. The night stretched on, and they talked for hours, sharing their fears, their hopes, and their commitment to making their marriage work. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with challenges but also the potential for healing and growth. And as they finally went to bed, there was a sense of peace between them, a fragile peace, but peace nonetheless. They both knew that the journey ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in a long while, they felt like they were facing it together. Aryan and Neha began the slow and painful process of rebuilding their marriage. The days were filled with counseling sessions, open conversations, and moments of vulnerability that tested the limits of their patience and resilience. They confronted the past, unearthing the wounds that had festered beneath the surface for far too long. Despite the challenges, there were small victories along the way. Aryan made a conscious effort to be more present in their relationship. He cut down his hours at the hospital, choosing instead to focus on the quality time he spent with Neha. They rediscovered simple pleasures, cooking meals together, taking evening walks through their neighborhood, and sharing stories from their day. These moments, though small, became the foundation upon which they began to rebuild their trust. However, the shadow of Priya still lingered, casting doubts and fears that were hard to shake. Neha struggled to banish the images of Aryan and Priya together, replaying their interactions in her mind. Every time Aryan's phone buzzed, a wave of anxiety would wash over her. She knew Aryan was trying his best, but the scars of betrayal were deep, and they weren't healing as quickly as she had hoped. One evening, Neha found herself sitting alone in their living room, flipping through old photo albums. She came across a picture from their honeymoon, a time when they were both full of love and optimism for the future. The smiles on their faces seemed a world away from the reality they were now living. As she stared at the photo, tears welled up in her eyes. She missed the innocence of their early days, the untainted love they once shared. Aryan walked in to find Neha crying softly. Without a word, he sat down beside her, wrapping his arms around her shoulders. "I miss us," Neha whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I miss us too," Aryan replied, his own heart heavy with regret. "I wish I could turn back time and undo everything that's happened." Neha looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "Do you think we can ever get back to what we had?" Aryan hesitated, knowing that the truth was complicated. "I don't think we can go back, Neha. But maybe we can build something new, something stronger." Neha nodded, wiping away her tears. "I want to believe that, Aryan. But it's hard. Every time I see you, I can't help but wonder if you're thinking about her. I hate feeling this way." Aryan took a deep breath, his voice filled with sincerity. "Neha, I want you to know that Priya is no longer a part of my life. I've cut all ties with her, and I'm committed to making." As the weeks turned into months, Aryan and Neha continued to navigate the delicate path of rebuilding their relationship. The progress they made was slow but steady, marked by moments of hope and setbacks that tested their resolve. They had committed to this journey together, but the weight of the past was always present, lurking in the shadows of their renewed connection. One evening, Aryan suggested something different, something that had been missing in their relationship for a long time. "Let's go on a trip, just the two of us," he said, his eyes filled with a spark of excitement that Neha hadn't seen in a while. "We need to get away from everything here and focus on us." Neha was hesitant at first. The idea of leaving behind the safety of their home, where they had built a fragile peace, was daunting. But Aryan's suggestion also held a promise of rediscovery, a chance to reconnect away from the daily reminders of their struggles. After some thought, she agreed. They decided on a small, secluded retreat in the hills of Rajasthan, far from the hustle and bustle of Jaipur. The journey to the retreat was filled with a quiet anticipation. As they drove through the winding roads, the landscape around them gradually shifted from the golden sands of the desert to the lush greenery of the hills. It was a welcome change of scenery, and for the first time in a long while, Neha felt a sense of calm. The retreat was a haven of tranquility, nestled amidst the natural beauty of the hills. The air was cool and fresh, a stark contrast to the heat and chaos of the city. Their cottage, perched on the edge of a cliff, offered breathtaking views of the valley below. It was the perfect place to leave behind the noise of their lives and focus on each other. The first day was spent exploring the surroundings, hiking through trails that wound through the forest, and enjoying the serenity of the place. Neha and Aryan talked as they walked, their conversations light and easy, touching on everything from their favorite childhood memories to their hopes for the future. It was a far cry from the tense, heavy discussions that had dominated their lives in recent months. That evening, they sat on the terrace of their cottage, watching the sun set over the hills. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, casting a warm glow over the landscape. Neha leaned against Aryan, feeling a closeness that had been absent for so long. "I've missed this," Neha said softly, her voice tinged with both sadness and contentment. "I've missed us." Aryan wrapped his arm around her, pulling her closer. "I've missed us too, Neha. I know we still have a long way to go, but being here with you. It feels like we're starting to find our way back." They sat in comfortable silence, the weight of the past momentarily lifted by the beauty of the present. As night fell, they made their way inside, the warmth of the cottage a cozy contrast to the cool night air. Aryan lit a fire in the fireplace, and they settled down on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. For the first time in what felt like forever, they weren't just coexisting, they were truly together. The walls that had been built between them were slowly coming down, brick by brick, with each shared moment. They laughed, reminisced, and even found themselves teasing each other the way they used to in the early days of their relationship. Later that night, as they lay in bed, Neha found herself thinking about how far they had come. There were still doubts and fears that lingered, but there was also a renewed sense of hope. This trip was a reminder that they were capable of rediscovering the love that had once been the foundation of their marriage. As Neha drifted off to sleep, she felt Aryan's hand gently squeeze hers, a small gesture that spoke volumes. It was a promise, an unspoken vow that they would continue to fight for each other, no matter how difficult the journey might be. The retreat marked a turning point in their relationship. They returned to Jaipur with a renewed sense of commitment to each other. The challenges that lay ahead were still daunting, but for the first time in a long while, they faced them with a united front. Their journey was far from over, but they were no longer just trying to survive, they were beginning to thrive, finding joy in the little things and strength in each other. Back in Jaipur, Aryan and Neha settled into a new rhythm, one that felt more balanced and mindful. The retreat had rekindled something between them, a connection that had been buried under layers of pain and misunderstanding. They both understood that sustaining this renewed bond required effort, patience, and most importantly, trust. Aryan found himself more attentive to Neha's needs, consciously making time for her despite the demands of his career. He realized that small gestures, like bringing her a cup of tea in the morning or simply asking about her day, went a long way in bridging the emotional gap that had formed between them. Neha, too, made an effort to be more open and communicative, sharing her feelings with Aryan instead of bottling them up. But even as they worked on their marriage, the lingering impact of Aryan's emotional affair with Priya continued to cast a shadow. Neha was haunted by doubts that she couldn't easily shake. Every now and then, the fear would creep back into her mind, making her question Aryan's commitment and whether he still harbored feelings for Priya. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Aryan noticed Neha's distant expression. "What's on your mind?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. Neha hesitated, not wanting to disrupt the fragile peace they had built. But she knew that avoiding the conversation would only make things worse. "I'm trying to move past everything that happened," she began slowly, "but sometimes, I can't help but wonder. Do you ever think about her?" Aryan felt a pang of guilt. He had tried to erase Priya from his thoughts, to focus entirely on repairing his relationship with Neha. But he also understood that Neha needed reassurance, and that meant being honest. "It's hard to forget everything that happened," he admitted, his voice measured. "But what I think about now is how much I regret letting things get to that point. My focus is on you, Neha, on us." Neha studied his face, searching for any hint of insincerity. All she found was a man who seemed genuinely remorseful, who was trying to make amends in the only way he knew how. "I believe you, Aryan," she said quietly. "But it's going to take time for me to fully trust again." Aryan nodded, understanding that trust couldn't be rebuilt overnight. "I know, and I'm here for the long haul. Whatever it takes." Their conversation was a step forward, a moment of honesty that helped to clear the air. But the real test of their renewed relationship came when Priya unexpectedly reappeared in their lives. One afternoon, Neha received a call from an old friend who worked in media. "Neha, have you seen the news?" the friend asked, her voice laced with curiosity. Neha frowned. "No, what's going on?" "There's an article making the rounds, something about a high-profile scandal involving a local journalist." The name caught my eye, Priya Sharma. "Isn't that the woman?" Neha's heart skipped a beat. Priya had disappeared from their lives after Aryan had ended things with her, and they hadn't heard from her since. "What kind of scandal?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's all over the news. Something about unethical practices and fabricating sources. She's under investigation, and it's not looking good." Neha hung up the phone, her mind racing. Part of her felt a grim satisfaction at the news, a sense of justice for the pain Priya had caused. But another part of her was filled with anxiety. What if Priya tried to contact Aryan? What if she somehow dragged him back into her world of chaos? When Aryan came home that evening, Neha hesitated before telling him about the call. She didn't want to disrupt the fragile balance they had achieved, but she also knew she couldn't keep it from him. "Aryan," she began, "I heard some news today." "About Priya?" Aryan's expression hardened. "What about her?" Neha relayed what she had learned, watching Aryan's reaction closely. His face remained impassive, but she could see the tension in his jaw. "I want you to know," Aryan said firmly, "that whatever happens with her, it doesn't change anything between us. My life with you is all that matters now." Neha nodded, but the anxiety still gnawed at her. I don't want her to come between us again." "She won't," Aryan assured her. "I won't let her." Days passed, and though the scandal surrounding Priya intensified in the media, she didn't reach out to Aryan. It was as though she had finally disappeared from their lives, leaving only the distant memory of a painful chapter that they were slowly closing. But even as they put Priya behind them, Neha couldn't shake the feeling that their relationship was still vulnerable. The scars were still fresh, and the fear of losing each other remained a constant undercurrent in their interactions. In an effort to strengthen their bond, Aryan suggested they start seeing a therapist together, someone who could guide them through the remaining issues and help them rebuild their trust. Neha agreed, recognizing that they couldn't do this alone. Their first few sessions were difficult, as they revisited the pain and betrayal that had nearly torn them apart. But with time, they began to open up more, revealing the fears and insecurities that had been festering beneath the surface. The therapist helped them see the patterns in their behavior, the ways in which they had unknowingly hurt each other over the years. Through this process, Neha began to realize that the affair with Priya was not the root of their problems, but rather a symptom of deeper issues that had gone unaddressed for too long. She started to understand that healing would require not just forgiving Aryan, but also forgiving herself for the ways she had contributed to the breakdown of their marriage. For Aryan, the therapy sessions were a humbling experience. He had to confront the ways in which he had failed as a husband, not just in his affair, but in the years leading up to it. The realization was painful, but it also gave him the clarity he needed to become a better partner. Slowly, the walls between them continued to come down, and they began to rebuild a relationship based on mutual respect and understanding. The process was far from easy, and there were still moments of doubt and fear. But they were learning to face those challenges together, rather than letting them drive a wedge between them. As the months passed, Aryan and Neha found themselves growing closer in ways they hadn't expected. The scars of the past were still there, but they were no longer the defining feature of their relationship. Instead, they were becoming a testament to their resilience, a reminder of how far they had come. And as they looked to the future, they did so with a renewed sense of hope, not because they had forgotten the past, but because they had faced it together and emerged stronger on the other side.